Notre Dame's schedule for the rest of the year sets them up, if we're talking about potential playoff caliber team. When we've talked about Notre Dame's schedule before, it's looking like the Southern Cal game. Southern Cal. USC fans got onto us last year for calling them Southern Cal, but we have another USC in conference, so we have to say Southern Cal to distinguish between the two. And South Carolina fans do get butthurt when we don't call them USC sometimes, so we got to do it. Anyway, I don't think USC is going to be great. I completely missed the boat of Florida State. I thought they had enough talent to win some games this year until the Willie Taggart effect started coming in and they had a gradual decline. They fell off a cliff. Northwestern looks bad, just got blown out by Duke. Pitt just got blown out. Virginia Tech's looking better than we thought, but really, Notre Dame's going to be favored. On paper right now, Notre Dame is favored in every single game the rest of the way. We are looking at the potential for like an 11-1. If you drop Stanford or Virginia Tech, 11-1, you're still in the national championship discussion. Do you think Notre Dame has to win out to make the playoffs, or can they go 11-1 and still take one of those playoff spots, especially seeing what we've seen so far with how weak all the conferences are, except for maybe one team at the top?
I think a lot of that's going to hinge on Southern Cal or USC, as you put it. If USC trails off and they're not very good, that's going to mean Notre Dame's going to end the season with 6 unranked teams in a row, because I don't see any way that any of the other 5 of the last 6 are going to be ranked.
Right.
And we had a discussion. We've had some discussions and comments, and then even in some forums, we try to participate with people about strength of schedule. And it's kind of funny coming off this, because the strength of schedule for Notre Dame, like you said, is starting to really fall due to some of this teams that they scheduled. Pitt, Florida State. Not that Pitt was supposed to be great, but they're looking a lot worse than was expected. Florida State is cratering. The strength of schedule is not going to be what it was expected to be. We're still not sure if Michigan's actually a very good football team or not. They blew out a cupcake this week, but that remains to be seen. I think more likely than not, if you're 11-1, I think the question is, would they beat out an 11-1 conference champion? And would they beat out 2 11-1 conference champions, right? There's five
Right.
Power 5 conferences. If USC and Stanford both do well, it's possible, for them to split that game. But if they beat them both, I think you end up beating out the Pac-12. Now, if they drop the Stanford game
Right.
and USC isn't very good and Stanford wins the Pac-12, there's no way an 11-1 Notre Dame is going to go over a Stanford team that beat them and won a conference title.
Right.
All the other
Right.
conference champions, we talk about this a lot. The conference champion aspect hasn't been in the committee's eyes as big a deal as people make it out to be. What was a big deal, like Ohio State in 2014, is they got a dominant win over a top 10 team in an extra game. That's been the big deciding factor. Notre Dame doesn't have the benefit of that. So that whatever the strength of schedule looks like right now, compared to conference champions, it's going to be worse, because they're pretty much all going to have a ranked or top 10 win added to their resume at the end of the season. So first off, I think you said going 11-1. If that one loss is Stanford, I don't think they get in, because then they're in real trouble compared to the Pac-12. And I don't know, you're really hoping that there's only 2 other one-loss teams in other conferences. And I think that's going to be a little too much to ask. If the one loss is Virginia Tech, you're in a lot better shape. And then you're going to take the slot from the pack. But if it's Ohio State, Clemson, and Oklahoma, all 11-1, that's also tough. So you get in over the pack, but I say that also the SEC champion, if they're 11-1, if it's Alabama or Georgia, I think they could get left out again. Especially, let's say Alabama. Again, the problem is Alabama and Georgia are both 11-1, and they play in the conference title. You're not going to get over the one that wins that game, because that team just beat another top 5 team. And I think a lot more hinges on that Stanford game than even looks at first blush, because if you win the Stanford game for the playoff discussion, that gives you an edge over the pack. And that probably gives you a route more likely than not in. If you drop the Stanford game, I think that flips. More likely than not, you can go 11-1 and you're going to get knocked out because the Pac's going to have an edge over you. And the moment that's in, it's asking too much for other conference champions not to have better resumes.
I think it's interesting because Notre Dame has a lot of the way their schedule shakes out. They have a lot of comparative markers. Again, this is the thing we complain about, right? With not having a lot of big, high-profile out-of-conference games, and everybody sort of circles the wagons in conference. They've got markers of competition against other high-ranking teams. Like, we kind of can get a gauge on who Notre Dame is and how they would be if they played in the ACC because they've got Pitt, Virginia Tech, Wake. Same thing with the Big Ten. They've already beaten Michigan. And then the same thing with the Pac because they've got USC and Stanford. So that's what's really cool about this schedule. But you're right. Because these teams, and again, you mentioned that their schedule is eroding and their schedule because of who they scheduled. It's not a knock on Notre Dame. It's not Notre Dame's fault that Florida State sucks any more than it was Alabama's fault. I mean, it's kind of Alabama's fault because they took Francois out last year, but it wasn't Alabama's fault that Florida State sucked throughout the year. They were preseason number 2 when they played them, and they scheduled them a couple years ahead of time. You're scheduling Stanford, Virginia Tech, Florida State, Michigan, Southern Cal. You're doing your job. So we're not complaining there. We're talking about the things that are outside of your control. And you don't have... Tell me if this is true, and we'll end on this because this is going a little long. But so now the strength of schedule thing is flipped. Now everybody sees Alabama as having, if they have a tough road through the SEC West, any SEC West team. But coming into the season, we were saying, man, Notre Dame's got a crazy hard schedule. Alabama's got a joke of a schedule, and they have no margin for error. If they lose and they don't win their division, they're out. I feel like it's kind of flipped now. And because of what's happening to all the teams around on Notre Dame's schedule, and we're not super high on Stanford either, by the way. They won that game. We picked them to win that game, both of us, but we're not super high on them. Is Notre Dame in Alabama's shoes where they were at the beginning of the year, where because of where their schedule is and they're not going to have a lot of marquee matchups? I said 11-1 before, but have we talked ourselves into Notre Dame having to go 12-0? And I'll let you end on that. Don't forget, subscribe, comment, let us know. Josh, take it away.
I think we may be in that situation, and I don't think, frankly, it's fair. But again, a lot of it, you say 12-0 or 11-1. Half the discussion is what are the other teams going to look like? We've already it already looks pretty clear that Georgia's probably going to win the SEC East, and they're maybe they have a loss in doing it, but if they split LSU and Auburn, they're going to be an 11-1 going in that conference championship game, and nobody's going to complain. Somebody's going to come out of the SEC West, has to, and win it. Maybe they have 2 losses, but probably you're going to end up with an 11-1 team, and it's probably going to be Alabama because of how good they looked. Virginia Tech and Clemson look like a 2-team race in the ACC right now. Nobody else looks competitive. If you look in the Big Ten, with Michigan looking pretty shaky, Michigan State lost to Arizona State. They don't look great. Wisconsin has struggled quite a bit. They might be good, but they have a pretty terribly easy schedule. So you're probably going to end up with a Wisconsin team that's going to have 1 loss or fewer, playing Ohio State, who's going to have probably 1 loss or fewer. Maybe Penn State's in that mix, but if they do, they're probably going to have 1 loss. So the problem is we're starting to rank up a lot of 1-loss teams. And given the schedule that Notre Dame has, and again, the fact that if Ohio State may play Wisconsin in a top 10 matchup, Virginia, and then you may have Alabama and Georgia, and Oklahoma doesn't get the benefit of a conference championship game. So that's kind of an interesting one, but it's hard right now to picture them not blowing out the rest of the competition. I think Notre Dame may have to go undefeated. And as much as Notre Dame fans may disagree, I do think they get a lot of benefit of the tout from the national media in terms of polls. But there's just every conference happens to be really top heavy at the same time, and that's going to create a lot of competition. And they really, at the end of the season, I'm not sure if they're going to end up with a team finished in the top 10 on their schedule. I don't know. And it's easy to say, well, they've got Stanford, Virginia Tech, but again, we're talking about 11-1, which probably means a loss to one of those two. And either one of them could be a backbreaker, because you lose to Virginia Tech, and there's no way you get over an ACC team or anyone better than them. You lose to Stanford, you can't get in over a Pac team. So yeah, I think never say never, because we don't know how it's going to shake out with the other teams. That's most of the equation, but more than likely, they're probably going to have to go undefeated with the schedule in order to get in.